All right, I think we are live. Mic check. All right. Not seeing this just yet, but wonder why it keeps doing this. Okay, there it is. All right, well, welcome back. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. This is season 2, episode 3, and the big update this week was Cloud 4.5, or Cloud Opus 4.5 model was released. And I know I've talked a little bit, maybe in depth a little bit about Cloud in the past, but today we're really going to get into it just because this is supposed to be the latest and greatest model for LLMs and coding and specifically. And I know a lot of people have released YouTube videos, showing all the metrics and how this is so much better and all these performance things that no one really knows too much about, all these tests and but how practical are those tests really? And so this week, I really got into Cloud Opus 4.5. I've been using all the other ones pretty regularly now. And I have to say that with the 4.5, I am impressed. It is a game changer, yes and no. Yes, for people like myself who uses this regularly for coding their own side projects and whatnot. But for the average person, who uses LLMs as a Google search, yeah, it's probably not really gonna make much of a difference. So I'll start with the good things that I really like about it straight off the bat. It is quite amazing at tracing and debugging your code logic. So it just seems to know all of these different frameworks and how they all, work together. And so for me, I've got like this Vue.js project, and it knows how the Vue router and the Pina stores and for state management and all the components and composables, how they all really relate and work together. And it seems to also know a lot of the quirks that most people have to go and do a whole lot of trial and error to figure out. So it's pretty amazing, honestly. Like usually in the past, I'll say with like Opus 4.5, 4.1, you'll ask it to help you, hey, why is this error happening? Here are all my files. What do you think is the problem? And I would say it was kind of hit or miss. Sometimes it would think it would have the solution. Then you go into and you're like, no, that's not it. You're definitely going the wrong direction. Let's, focus on this track instead. And now I would say I feel like it's almost 75 to 80% confidence that, hey, it's pretty accurate in terms of what's going on and figuring out even the small stupid things like your file is missing as a typo, like some of those stupid errors that I've definitely made and given me headaches, like why is everything not working? It's crashing. Oh, I made a typo here and it doesn't know that file name or can't find it. But like that's just a simple version, but like the more complex logic, I would say, and particularly with all these front end frameworks, they rely on this whole reactivity system, which is always great in concept, but like I feel like you have to have a lot of guardrails. So you have like all these sort of listeners and I guess in the case of Vue, they call them watchers, and they all do generally the same idea is you listen for an event and then that triggers something. And so you have all these functions, but it's not always clear when they're going to fire and how they're going to interact. So you could always have like issues sort of like initializing or reinitializing the same component multiple times or multiple callbacks. Like you can have all these asynchronous functions and you think they're firing when they're supposed to, but something else could happen that the triggers a watcher or a listener, and that reinitialize the whole thing, and it's not supposed to be doing these sort of things. Anyways, all that to say is Cloud is actually really good at Opus 4.5, sorry, is really good at distinguishing these little nuances. And when you tell it about it, hey, look out for this, and it might take like a minute longer, but it's definitely worth the extra knowledge, I guess, output coming from these models, and having a higher accuracy. And so I think for me, that is huge. And you'll see in a minute as I get into the updates and the tests that I did personally. But I think that is by far the biggest strength of Opus 4.5 is the whole debugging and tracing of logic, complex logic. Like I'm talking 20 files, each with like 1,000 lines. And if you can, give them all the files that you need, that the problem is contained or the bug is within this group of logic, it's really good at figuring it out. And that saves me so much time. I'm not going to say like printing or console.log is, dead going forward, but I will say that you probably don't need to do nearly as much of that sort of, janky debugging logic. I've never been a big unit test guy, so I'll just print console variables and things as I need. But with this model, like, it's really good, and the faster, most people spend most of their time with all this code just debugging code. Like I'm just majority of time when I'm building PenPublic, I'm just debugging JavaScript and Python, needlessly. And this basically helps a competent developer, iterate so much faster. So you become more efficient. And this week, I would say I did quite a lot of features that were in my backlog, also debugging things that were broken. And it's, I think Sundar said, with these models, like coding has become a joy again. And I feel like that, it's definitely taken a lot of the painful parts, of debugging, figuring out what's going on, why is this not working the way I wanted to. And so you can focus on more higher level, architectural decisions and tasks, and just managing almost like a project manager. But I mean, you still need to know how to code, right? Like I'm never going to discount that. And, I'll admit that, a lot of code, I'll just have it spit out, and I won't even read most of it. Like what I'll do is I'll save a copy of my code onto like another text file, and I'll paste in the new code. The first thing I do is I'll check the number of lines, sort of like as a dum-dum test. And, if it's pretty similar, I'm more confident. If it's significantly lower or significantly higher, I have more causes for concern. But I'm going to stick to more positives. So I really like this whole memory, I say in quotes, because it's more just like uh, doing a Google search on itself of all these past conversations that you've had, and just kind of archiving or categorizing them, and basically reading through them real quick to see what, the gist of what was said. It doesn't remember all the details, but sometimes you can have it do a lot of callbacks to previous conversations, which is so nice because I get so tired of having to re-explain everything every time I create a new conversation. Like, okay, where was my prompt that I was using before? Let me just go copy that and then paste it again. And like, just to get back to where you were previously, you have to, go through all this prompts from the very beginning, like explain everything from, ground zero, day one, and you're just wasting tokens doing that. So being able to say, hey, remember our last conversation, we were talking about this. Here's, an update, and I want to do XYZ now. And, it'll take an extra 30 seconds to a minute or something, and going to doing the search. And what's nice is I personally just use the web interface for Cloud. I know it's not as cool and as popular as using something like Cursor, Windsurf, and all those IDEs, co-pilots built in. But just for me and my project personally, I'm really I'm careful about having the AI touch my code directly, just because I found it wasn't easy to revert back, and I'm not like pushing things constantly onto Git, and just doing too many Git commits, and checkouts and going backwards, and yeah, it's just not ideal. So like I said, what I like to do is I'll just copy it over onto another text document, and that just works for me. Yeah, so the things that I don't like about Opus 4.5, it's still got a lot of the same problems as 4.1, which I guess is to be expected. I was hoping for some fixes, but these some seem to be like fundamental issues with these AI LLMs in general. The first thing is, it just by default it over engineers everything. Like, hey, I want it. Can you build me this feature? And then it will give you the most wordy like implementation of this feature. I'm like, no, I just want the most simple, the fewest lines of code possible, because as soon as you just put in all this big codes, like when you go back and to edit and change things in the future, it just gets more and more convoluted. And so managing these large files, I personally don't like to go over 500 to 1,000 lines, and it's just too much. Like, even manually scrolling up and down, even in the best IDEs, I use VS Code. Personally, I think it's great. But yeah, if it gets any longer than that, it's just too hard to find anything. And so you want to break it up into smaller files in general. And I don't want to have like hundreds and hundreds of files. Like, it doesn't make me feel good to say I have, all these 1,000-line files and my project is so big. Like, I just think that's unnecessarily bloated. And if you're, wasting all these resources to do a simple process, you're just wasting time, your user's time, computational time, and debugging in the future, for yourself going forward. So the first thing I always have to do is tell AI, I'll oftentimes just stop them like midway, like, oh, this is where you're going down this path. Yeah, this is not what I want to do. Let's stop. That's a good idea, but let's try this strategy instead. Or I'll ask it, what do you think of, this way to debug this problem? And I'll ask it in a way, I guess they call this prompt engineering, being able to give the LM a prompt and have it give you what you want. And I feel like I've done this so many times, so I have a pretty good uh, feel for it. But a lot of times I'll stop in midway and it's like, okay, I can see where you're going. If I let you continue, you're going to go for like 5 minutes straight and just start coding unnecessarily. But like, I do like how they say, what their idea is, like what their strategy as far as fixing your bug or adding your new feature. It's just by default, I don't think I need like 5 different helper functions, or create 2 different new files, like for unnecessarily. Like, let's just use the existing code infrastructure that's in place. I made these architectural decisions for a reason. Let's stick to them. Let's not include too many different libraries, because we don't want to have such high dependencies, and have things potentially break, down the line. And so that's kind of my number one pet peeve. I find myself, always stopping it and saying, okay, with the fewest minimal changes possible, let's try to implement this and come up with an alternative strategy. And sometimes it'll get there, and then sometimes I'm like, okay, here's my idea. What do you think about it? And I like saying it that way because there's a lot of things that, I might not think of. And the fact that it's so good at tracing through your logic, like a lot of times I forgot what's in the code. Like, even though I've directed it to write it, the truth of the matter is all my files have been refactored so many times over because of AI. And like, I can't remember the last time I actually wrote like loops and lines of code. It's more just like code reviews now. And people who work with these LLMs probably know what I'm talking about. Yeah, it's vibe coding in essence, but you're still in charge of all the important decisions of how this application is going to work and run, or how to script the algorithm and the logic. Those are higher level decisions, which the programmer or coder needs to definitely understand how the whole ecosystem, the whole application functions and works together, what every I guess file's purpose. And so, because if you don't know that, then it's going to be impossible to debug. And yeah, so like there's like a baseline level of understanding you have to have over your code base. But like I said, I haven't written any lines of code in a long time. Doesn't mean I can't go in and modify, some variables here, add, some, changes or modifications here, or delete a whole bunch of unnecessary old code. But yeah, you don't really have to write as much, and it's more just like directing like a junior engineer. And I guess that's why they keep saying, it's like having an intern or a junior engineer, entry level position, and giving them tasks and assignments, and reviewing their work. But this like junior engineer just also happens to know like every single API and documentation. Like I haven't used Stack Overflow in ages, so it's pretty crazy. Yeah, I talked about wasting tokens. The other thing that it's still really bad at is the long conversations. So the longer your conversations go, it tends to start to hallucinate, or your artifacts, the files that it's modifying, it won't update the changes, and so it just gives you the same file back, and it gets confused easily. And basically, it's just like, imagine you're drunk and you have all this brain fog. Like, the longer the conversation goes, it's like talking to a drunk coder, and you're like, okay, you're not making a lot of sense anymore. And it's important for you as the user or the programmer to cut it off. Like, okay, you're done for this conversation, or I'm cutting you off for, this is last call for you. We're starting a new conversation, but the assignment or the task is not done yet. So we still need to, get back to our starting the same point we were at. Unfortunately, we have to start a new conversation. So, like I was saying, that you have to refresh it with all the, files and the saved prompt, or at least the last prompt that you used. So, usually now with the memory feature, it can at least go back to your last conversation to kind of have an idea of where you were, and given your prompt, usually your last prompt, it can kind of start you at a further along your journey, I guess. Yeah, whereas in the past, it was kind of like starting from square one, like, okay, I need to upload everything and, explain to you what all this does and what I'm trying to do. And, it's a lot of the questions and answers that you had gone through previous in your conversations that all gets lost. So it's a lot of re-explaining things, which is really annoying. So yeah, I don't know if there's a fix for that. They've tried to implement this whole minimization thing, where it just like compresses your conversations, but I find that it's not very helpful. Like, it just means that you can go longer, because in the past, I feel like the conversations, the responses would kind of take longer to get back to you. And sometimes when you type in and enter a prompt, it would reject it. Like, it would just kind of circle, 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 and then error out, and then just, hey, try again. So yeah, I guess it's still not good at that, unfortunately. But the new changes, I will say, all in all, I'm very happy with. And in summary, it's great for someone like me who's doing a lot of coding, intense coding for an actual application. Not really useful for the everyday person. So take it for what it is. It's not, gonna move the needle that much as far as AGI is concerned. It's just good for people who are coders, be more efficient, which, could spell bad news for software engineers, especially entry level engineers in the future. I don't envy their outlook right now. Like, I feel like you have to have some background in something else, because this definitely lowers the bar for getting into coding. Like, those code boot camps, those days are long gone. And so yeah, this model is just so impressive. And all right, let me switch up the topics now. Where is it? All right, so kind of doing things a little bit in reverse this time, talking about the news of Claude. And now we're going to talk about the actual applications that, I used Opus 4.5, I guess you could say, by test, real world tests that I did for actually implementing a lot of fixes to PenPublic. So I've got a lot of backlog of things. Last week, I was saying, all these states are basically crashed. And the solution was not very robust. And so the issue was the way I had designed it was everything was hard coded to a specific file name. So the idea is, you get your new jobs weekly, and then the front end would go and make a call to your back end. That's a Lambda call, and the Lambda points to this week's file of new jobs. So if you're, say, for example, something in the pipeline crashes and there is no new jobs file, like, hey, your whole aggregation process broke. There's no new file to update. The backend would still point to this file, it just doesn't exist. And then you get this, circle loop of doom. And that's because that file didn't exist. And the algorithm was looking for a specific date. So like the beginning of the week, basically. And to make it more robust, I wanted it to be at least show something. It's better than showing nothing and a circling waiting icon. And so what I have now is, a sort of a main backup. I guess it's the main file now. And it's always going to contain the latest job set. So even if this week's jobs didn't come in, for example, you're still going to have last week's at least. And they might not always be up to date, but at least a good chunk of them will still work as long as, they haven't passed a closing date. And I think that's, the better implementation. So now I'll never have a crashed website like I did for the last month or so. And Opus 4.5 was so great at helping me debug both the front end side and the back end, because it's this big pipeline on both sides. It's a whole bunch of like one script talks to another, has an output, and which is the input for something else, and it's all tied together. And then once on my end, it gets uploaded to the cloud after it's done all this processing, and then it gets grabs from the front end, and then it has to do all its other, front end things, saving into cache in your IndexedDB and serving it up to the users. There's a lot of places where things can go wrong. And so, debugging the whole pipeline, it takes a while. And having this tracer debugging and improvements in 4.5, oh my gosh, I have to say, like, it would have normally taken me probably a week at least to maybe do one or both sides, and the front and the back end. So yeah, that was pretty amazing. That's just one thing that I managed to do in a single day. Like I said, 1 week to 1 day, that's crazy. So yes, I think I mentioned before, the HTML, the DOM of some sites change and get updated over time. And so basically all my configuration files are all messed up, and that's why nothing is being aggregated anymore. And so being able to, find what's the new updated CSS tags essentially, and, if there's any new processes that might, pop up windows, or I don't know, other things that might get in the way, scrolling or pushing a button or drop down menu, or different type of pagination, stuff like that, dealing with JavaScript websites in general. And so that was a pretty relatively painless fix with Opus 4.5, just because it was able to figure out what was wrong, which is diagnosing, debugging that's half the battle, and then figuring out the fix. Well, I already know the fix. Like I once you have done enough, looked at enough of these websites, you start to kind of get the feel for what's needed to get the information that you need, and like how to go about doing it. There's a few handful of processes that you need to do or look for, and you start to see these patterns emerge. And so, okay, I'm gonna use this sort of a strategy to fix my files. And yeah, that was pretty, it took me like a couple hours at most. Yeah, so nothing too crazy. And that couple hours gets you like, well, in this case, USA jobs. That's federal, and that gets you like, whew, I don't know, a couple thousand jobs at least. Yeah, what else? Oh, another big one that I did was I managed to add Washington, D.C. So originally, I had started this, like I mentioned last week, as a single state, California, where I live. And, I had to branch out and scale everything. Basically, I had to refactor my entire code base to account for these extra states and having redundant tables and saved variables and things. So and you can imagine this huge pipeline that has to basically be refactored for updating all these variables and the logic to be more flexible to account for state. And I had done that all in one go, adding from California to New York to Texas and Florida. But I hadn't touched this in like months. So, coming back to it and trying to add DC was kind of a big ordeal compared to adding all those three at once. Because, once you're going through the entire pipeline chain by chain, adding, a second, third, and fourth, it's not that difficult when you're just going through it. But now, coming back to it, it's like I got to go through that whole chain again, but just to add this one state. So it's just this whole pipeline of script files and one file relying on another file, and yeah, just processing all of this job data just requires a lot of different algorithms, processes, fixes, scripts, whatever, and adding a single state now is kind of a pain, but it's still not terrible. It just requires a little bit of debugging, like I said, because like I haven't touched this in a while, and it's very easy for something along the chain to break, and you're like, oh, why didn't this work the way I went? Oh, because I forgot to go and change this variable here and this, or I need to include this JSON file here and update these these dependencies. So it's, yeah, a lot of back and forth, but yeah, it definitely helps speed things up somewhat with 4.5. I would say getting it right faster, saves you more time, obviously. So that's another way that 4.5 is an improvement over 4.1, is being able to identify and the problem faster saves you a lot of time, and just generally speaking. Now, the implementation of the solution of what needs to be done isn't like, that's a whole different ballgame. Like I said before, like it just wants to over engineer everything. And so, yeah, I have in my head, this is how I want it to work. And, this might not be the most elegant or most robust, but, it works for all these other scenarios. So this is the same pattern. Let's just apply the same pattern and tweak it, add in this exception here to the rule. That's generally what most of these small debugs, updates, changes, fixes require entail. What else? Oh, so some other cooler features. Well, cool in my sense. A lot of people that aren't really power users of PenPublic, like myself, probably won't even realize that these things have been added or changed or fixed. Small details like quality of life things, I think, are important, as far as so long as they're not super hard to implement. So there's always a balance. Like, hey, it would be cool to have all these functions and features, but what's actually feasible? That might be a smaller set. Like, I could do all these, but it would take this much amount of time, and I don't have that much time. So what's the compromise? The 80-20 rule, Pareto principle, right? Like, let's try to optimize and compromise. Hey, I can give you 80% of the features, and this will only take me this small 20% of the time. And so one of the cool things I did add was for job details. Now they've got hyperlinks to both the agency's profiles and both the job querying. So it's kind of like, hey, I'm looking at a plumber or a electrical engineer position, for example. And it's in this city, this agency, this region. It's got an engineering tag, job tag on it. I can click on any of those now under the job details, and it'll kick me back out to like the job search page, and it'll do a query for other similar jobs, right? That you're looking for, either in the same agency or same region or same, job area. So I think that's just a small quality of life improvement that really I find helpful, because otherwise you got to go back and you have to manually do the search yourself again. Small thing. Oh, okay. Another one. Uh, so up till now, a lot of these, the whole pipeline, that I have automated has been run with using batch files, which are great. Like, get me wrong, but there has to be a better way when you need more, I guess, flexibility. Like, for example, I want to go and get all these jobs from all these different, agencies all at the same time. Batch file, it's not great at doing that, because you want to also specify blocking functions or blocking lines of, like, hey, I want you to go to do all these jobs, but wait till they're all done before you move on, for example. And that's not always the easiest thing to do. So I learned about, and with the help of Claude 4.5, create these orchestrator files that basically act like really fancy batch files. So it gives you a lot more power and functionality with regards to like the order that you can run your different scripts. So it's like building your pipeline, but it's much more advanced. So it's got like all these fancy bells and whistles. It's it's like, if you're into civil engineering, it's like an alternate pipe culvert that's got all these casings, and it's got like these fancy joint seals, and it's got elbows, and it's got all these really nice, it's got really good anchoring systems. It's got plenty of headroom and cover, and it's a really great piece of engineering. And that's the same thing with these orchestrator files. It's you're building this incredible pipeline that's so customizable compared to a batch file where you're limited to like command prompts typically. I know with PowerShell, like in Windows, you can do a little bit more, but that's not as commonly used. So being able to use JavaScript or Python or something to, synchronize everything. A lot of, when you're dealing with the internet, a lot of times it's asynchronous, which makes people uncomfortable. And so you don't know when the data or what, like you'll send off a function to go fire, go do this, go grab and get this stuff off the internet. And you don't know when it's going to come back. You don't know when it's going to process. So being able to, do these things, loops, and as they come, it's a little bit more complicated than the batch file can do. And so it's been a lot of fun. I'll say, trying to create these custom orchestrator files for every state. And yeah, so I'm like, my bash file used to be like 15 lines of code, right? Calling the command prompt to run this script, right? Now it's like 500 lines of code, but it's still very manageable because you have like a general, like a main function or like a configuration object or something, right? So you're not having to interact with all the different lines of code and functions. You just want to make sure that they're doing their jobs properly when you call them. And so, yeah, that's part of testing too, like, hey, you're the architect, you should know how this works. You should also know how to test whether it's doing what it's supposed to be doing. Because sometimes Cloud will say, hey, I think this is what you want. Here you go. Here's the code. Try it. And then if you don't know how to test all the different cases, edge cases, scenarios, right? Like, hey, this isn't quite behaving the way I thought it would be. Why is that? And then you have this longer conversation with Opus 4.5. And, the good thing is I feel like Opus 4.5 gets you faster than Opus 4.1, if that makes sense. Like, I'm not always the best explainer, but I'll try to like type kind of do a word or a thought kind of splat onto the prompt, like, hey, this is supposed to do this, that, why is this doing that, how come this looks like this? And so sometimes our prompts are really scatterbrained, but it kind of knows what you're asking, because when you're getting to that detailed level, like it's pretty smart and intelligent that way. And in that sense, it's very impressive that it can just understand, like, you don't have to have perfect grammar in English and you can put in typos and it's still fine. But as long as you're very specific in your questioning, and if you the more that you can kind of isolate the issues, like, hey, check this file and this big function. I think the problem is in here. I don't know where exactly, but just because I know how everything else interacts, that's working as it should. This is working as it should. But when it gets here, I think something's going on, because after that, it goes to here and it doesn't quite look right. And so I think the problem is somewhere over here. And, you can talk to it like that. And obviously it doesn't make sense to our normal person that, like, if I'm talking to anyone on the street, like, they won't have any idea what I'm talking about. But because you're having this back and forth conversation with Cloud, it seems to pick up and understand the context a lot better. So basically, I don't know where I was going with this, but orchestrator file, it's pretty cool. So I've got a whole lot of parallel processes going nowadays, which has definitely cut down on some time. And I'm definitely, I've done my own tests, but it's not technically in production yet as far as in automation. So next week, stay tuned. I will definitely be watching closely this week to see if the automation is working properly. In reality, it'll probably take 2 to 3 weeks or something to iron out any kinks. But just from my manual testing of the orchestrator process pipeline, it's been working pretty effectively. So I'm very impressed. Man, like I said, I did a lot of testing. So, and for the most part, like that just shows how powerful this debugging and tracing of code actually is, how big of a deal. I had another small issue with logout persistence. So for folks familiar with, authentication, it's not supposed to, but the problem was every time I refreshed a page, if you were logged in, it would log you out. Not a huge deal because I made the login process, the authentication system is custom actually. So I built my own authentication system with JWT, JavaScript Web Tokens, and it's pretty cool because it's all cached, and so long as you've proven that you've logged in once, it's fairly automated. And the main reason what we're having users to log in and create these profiles is because I want them to have all these extra features, and that's more personal to you. So the main thing is like saving your jobs, and so that's another thing that I worked on this week was making it more user friendly. So like when you're searching for jobs, you'll, hey, you find like five, that you want to highlight and save to recall later or, come back to. Sort of like when you're, I don't know, searching for stuff on Google or looking for articles, you find, hey, this article looks interesting. I'll come back to it later, but that's not the topic I was, originally interested in. So same idea, you're saving. I call it like a playlist of jobs, but which is essentially a to-dos list, in coding terms. And basically, it's your favorites jobs list. And I've added, features like sorting by, closing dates, by job name, by location, allowing manual reordering. So I think there's like a drag and drop library that I included. So folks, using your phones, you can go up and down and you can drag them one by one. I thought that was cool. It also got little arrows, small little things, right, that you can mess around with. And I also added, another thing was in-app notifications. So I was debating whether to put in like push notifications, but it turns out you need to have like some server-side code, and this is like kind of goes back to like I was saying about the trade-offs, like a push notification that's running in the background using a server versus an in-app notification system. Yeah, I know you. Yeah, so I don't think it's that big a difference, honestly. Like, if you're going to be actually jobs hunting, technically you're going to be, checking in or logging into this using this app or whatever job search app or website you're using. You're typically going to be using it regularly. And so in this case, when you log in, once a day, it'll put a notification at the top, which jobs that you favorited that are, closing soon. So it's a nice little reminder. And to get around the whole running in the background thing, which I don't think most PWAs, web apps can really do. That's mostly reserved for mobile apps. I put a little button that exports to G Calendar. So for every job that's in your favorites, there's a little button that kicks it out, and you can create an event that's pre-populated with the job name, the agency location, and all the details of the job, and link back to PenPublic of the job. So yeah, I thought that was pretty cool. Just for me personally, like if I wanted to save, some certain jobs and have that on my calendar, that'll remind me anyway. So yeah, why build a whole ecosystem when you can just use what's people are already, doing already. And maybe I'll get around to doing something for iCal. I'm personally an Android user, so the whole Google thing, I feel like most people are using Google anyway. Yeah, yes, that's just me. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I was able to do in 1 week. So a lot of stuff has been, on the back burner for months, just because I didn't want to get into all this. But I have to say that, all these functions, features, pipeline refactoring, and yeah, basically adding things and fixing things, it's become a lot easier to do and less painful. So having that lower barrier to entry, or at least that pain point, like the more painful it is to keep debugging everything, like you have to be very persistent, because I feel like coding is the most frustrating thing ever. But the win is when you are able to fix things and get to behave and work the way you want it to. That's when you feel like you've really accomplished building something. And yeah, it's really a high, honestly, being able to, complete so many different things so quickly. It's like, oh man, I want to catch this high. Let's, what else do I have on my Jira backlog of, action item tasks? And so I was just able to crank through all these things in a single week. And I'm pretty much caught up. There's only maybe one or two small things left that I really need to do. But honestly, going forward, I'm not even going to be doing a whole lot of product development. I think I would say that PenPublic is in a really good spot right now as far as features, functionality, user interface. It might not be the prettiest looking thing, as far as a UX designer is concerned, but I'm an engineer. I want functionality, practicality. I'm okay with material design. A lot of people these days will scoff at that. Oh my gosh, whatever. Like, I think using out of the box material design for the whole layout and look and feel, it's professional looking. It's good enough. If it's good enough for Google or whatever. I guess they're creating their own material design too or something. But hey, this looks like an actual app, so I'll take it. All right, so yeah, enough about that. Let me starting to lose my voice now. All right. So last thing, like I like to do every week, is what am I going to be doing going forward? And basically, I'm not going to be doing as much of the website development. It's more just about adding more agencies, increasing my coverage of jobs, aggregated and centralized. I feel like with a jobs website, like it's only as useful to people as the number of jobs that you're able to aggregate. That's the whole point, right? So the more jobs that you have aggregated, the more useful that it becomes. And the more useful it becomes, the more people who might be interested in using it, just instead of myself. And so, granted, not everyone's going to be, job searching all the time, but in this economy now, I'll touch on some stories maybe next week. Yeah, I'm getting kind of tired, so like I know in the news there were some things that I did want to talk about at some point. So future shows, I'll talk about more actual what's going on in the news with regards to the economy, the unemployment, the outlook for Gen Z, and basically how PenPublic kind of can help out with all your goals and careers and your kind of financial woes and what you can do with your degrees when you graduate. And yeah, I'm going to kind of get into more of that stuff going forward. But this week, I just wanted to talk purely about AI and Claude 4.5, since that's the hot new thing out right now. And in all honesty, like most of these models are at a point where they're not improving too dramatically. Like you're not seeing, I don't know, like crazy AGI like happening. Like it's gonna write all my files for me, one shot them, and with the ideal algorithms and engineering, the way that I want it to be. So, and debugging things, on the first try, like, yeah, it's never going to get to that point. But making the whole process of coding less painful, I feel like that's always been the theme for coders, and it makes it more fun to type and write code. That's, I guess, the best thing I can say. And so that's, kind of my weekly recap. And going forward, just going to be adding more jobs, agencies. I want to look into like the UCs, the CSUs, and then also expand to other states, because right now, like I have these other states in there, but there's not a lot of jobs there yet. So yeah, I'm definitely going to be focusing on DC. I feel like it's probably a bigger underserved market than I realized. Just because I thought California is so big, right? DC is so tiny. But from my reading understanding, the culture there is pretty like similar to out here in California, the Bay Area, where it's really hustle culture. But in their case, it's not tech related, it's all government related. So that is actually right up PenPublic's alley. And here, everything here is AI. Over there it might be more related to what's going on in the news and the feds, and yeah, their whole career progression ladder in the public sector. And so yeah, I think I need to pay more attention to that. And then I'm going to also, I don't know if I'll get to it this week, but going to try and look into more of creating my AI avatar with Comfy UI. So sad to be using Cloud Opus 4.5 less for coding, but it's still great for general learning purposes. So like I don't know anything really about Comfy UI, and all these different models are out there when it comes to text and audio and images and video. Like there's a whole lot of open source models that are really tough to learn, and what kind of inputs and what all these variables and knobs and dials that you can turn, and it's like, yeah, it's kind of complicated. And so sort of like how you have a co-pilot to help you code, an assistant, yeah, it's the same idea, I think, when learning any new software nowadays that's popular, or at least open source. So for all these open source AI models, it's really good and knowledgeable, honestly. Obviously, it's only so good as up to when 4.5 was trained. I'm not sure exactly when that was. I want to say it might just be trained up to like January of 2025 or so. So like it doesn't really know about models that have come out since then or any news of anything that come out since then. So you kind of have to tell it, what's happened going on. It can do a Google search and it can kind of find news articles or something, but it's even the web search functionality is not that great yet. Like there's a lot of websites it can't read, and yeah, it's kind of hit or miss right now. So that's hopefully coming in Opus 4.7 or whatever, increasing their web search capabilities, because that's kind of annoying right now. Like, hey, can you see this website so I don't have to explain to you everything that's on it or copy and paste the whole website for you? Yeah. And so that's basically my plans for this next week going forward. And thank you, everyone, for listening to episode 3 of season 2. And I'll see you all back again next week. Thanks.